Have a rare interview today with a Stampede Wrestling legend. He's also the inventor of the ladder match, six-time Stampede Wrestling North American champion. He's a Stampede Wrestling Hall of Fame member, class of 1995. He's a Cauliflower Alley Club award winner. According to Wikipedia, which we'll ask him about in this interview, it says he was a two-time Caribbean Tag Team Champion, but we'll get into that. Mr. Dan Kroffat, the Cowboy, how are you doing today, sir?
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your fans and to speak with you.
Well, great. I see you already have fans on here watching, so that's a good sign. Right now, you're out of the business and you don't actually live in Calgary anymore. You live shortly out of the city in Cochrane, Alberta. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, about a 30-minute drive, population of about 35,000, close to the Rocky Mountains. And it's been a place that I chose not only for retirement purposes, a slower and kinder, gentler lifestyle, but it's also given me an opportunity to get engaged with the community, which is something I really look forward to after retiring from wrestling.
You still look like you're keeping yourself in shape as well. Are you frequenting the gym there?
No, I've never had a great love of gyms, but what I like to do is we're very fortunate. We live in a community where we have a lot of hiking, and we live at the base of a mountain here, which is just a very beautiful setting. So each day I try to get out. I kind of started this when I was 50, which was 25 years ago. And I like to walk every day and get a good workout with walking, a little bit of light workout after, but never had a fixation with gyms. I'm not too sure why. I've just never really liked them. But anyhow, I do enjoy the outdoors.
And you've managed to keep your hair throughout the years, unlike some of us.
Well, it's getting thinner and thinner. Unfortunately, I've come to accept one of the terms I created a few years ago. It's called relinquish and replace. And with regards to my hair, I haven't been able to replace that, but I've relinquished a lot of things, physical capabilities and other things, but you replace them with other things. You know, the things I couldn't do any longer physically, you know, I'm enjoying doing other things. And but my hair has lasted a little bit longer than most. Yes, it's true.
Now, as far as your wrestling career, I understand you were recruited into wrestling through training in Vancouver back when you lived in British Columbia. Could you kind of tell us about your athletic background and how you were introduced to professional wrestling?
You know, it's strange. I would have never anticipated getting into wrestling, but quite often in life, they say circumstances occur for a reason. And when I was a bit of a lifeguard, if you will, I used to hang around English Bay in Vancouver, which was a beautiful beach. But I had a career, hopes of being a baseball player. I had a shot, was in Walla Walla, Washington in a World Series, if you will, as a young man, and hit over 400 and thought Pittsburgh Pirates were looking at me, one of the scouts. I thought, well, I'm going to have a career in baseball, but that never occurred. And then I ran into a fellow by the name of Earl Maynard. I was on the beach in Vancouver, and he walked up to me. He was a pro wrestler and a former Mr. Universe. And he asked me if I had any athletic background, and particularly wrestling. And I sort of never thought much of it, just said I've always been involved in athletics, swimming, baseball, whatever it was that I could get involved in. And he said to me, would you consider pro wrestling? And I kind of smiled, laughed, and thought, you know, I'm not sure where we're going with this. But he then said to me he'd be happy to make a call to Stu Hart in Calgary and introduced me to him, and who knows? So lo and behold, he made that call, and I packed up my bags, and within a week, my wife and I jumped in a car, $1,800 to our name, and ended up in Vancouver, or in Calgary, I should suggest, with a little bit of a forewarning to a thing called the Dungeon, but I really wasn't sure what that was all about. And of course, that's where my career actually started in 1969. I arrived in August, and then I went through a training program with Stu Hart with 12 other guys. And at the end of 6 weeks, there were only 2 of us left. And my experience in the Dungeon is a story, or possibly even a movie within itself. But of course, that that could be of another conversation.
Well, the fans always like to hear some of the information about the dungeon because it has such a reputation to it. Did he ever put you through any of the stretches that we hear about some of these wrestlers being tortured with?
You know, that question is one of the great mysteries of my life, and I'll explain to you why. There were, I think, 12 of us trying to start there. He brought us in. He said the show started around the first or second week in September, and over the next 5 to 6 weeks, it'd be a trial period for most of us to want to break in. He had a variety of athletes there. There were football players there. There were guys in down in the dungeon, and when I arrived, I really felt out of place. You know, I was probably 6 feet, 220 at the time, 218. But a lot of the guys were 6'4", 6'2". There were football players, linemen. And I really thought I have no chance. But what occurred was really quite interesting. Each night, I noticed that he would take one of the fellows, one of the 12 or 13 of us out onto the mat, and he would demonstrate holds in that. Before I knew it, I was watching him. Each night he would take a guy and he would put him through a routine. And some of these routines afforded the person the opportunity to look at parts of their body they had never seen before. They turned purple. Guys were screaming for their lives. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself into? I'm not sure if I want to proceed with this. And am I next? Night after night went by. I kept going back to the gym, down to his dungeon with him. And I'd go home and I'd say to my wife after the training period, I'd say, I don't know if I can do this. You won't believe what's happening to some of these guys. But ironically, still to this day, I never got a final answer. And I'll explain, even when I asked the question on Stu Hart's final days of his life, he never did anything to me once. Actually, if anything, we went through holds, the procedures, how to fall properly, how to pick a person up. He demonstrated some holds on me, but they were certainly not stretching type or where I was screaming for my life. But he was weeding guys out. And I noticed the crowd, our numbers started to deplete. After about 5 or 6 nights, there were 2 or 3 less of us. And after about 4 weeks, there were about 4 of us left. And after about 5 weeks, there were 2 of us left, myself and a fellow named Gilles Passon. He went on to be Alex the Butcher. I never worked with him, but he went back east and he worked. And I, to this day, am astonished because I was one of the few. I was the last man standing, if you will. And then when the show opened, Stu booked me on the card, and the rest of it is history. But even in his very last days, I visited him in the hospital, and it was a day before he passed. And I remember sitting by his bedside. It was just him and I alone. And I thanked him for everything he did for me, because I really feel like whatever success I had in my life following wrestling, I feel he set the stage for me to carry on. So after my retirement, opening a business and working with community, fundraising, charity work, my name was well established, and I give him full credit for that, because I don't think I may have had such a successful career in life after wrestling if it hadn't been for Stu giving me that opportunity. But I did ask him at bedside, I said, Stu, how come you never ever hurt me when we were breaking in the dungeon? I never got a direct answer back. I got a bit of a smile and a bit of a deflection in his answer, but he never pointed it out. So the only thing I can assume is he must have thought I may have had some talent, and maybe my attitude was right. I'm not sure, but I saw all these other fellas, really, quite frankly, I saw a lot of guys get stretched, and guys who I thought could go on to make a tremendous career in wrestling, good looking, well-built guys, but for some reason they didn't meet Stu's criteria, I guess. So they were long gone.
Interesting that you trained with Gilles Poisson there, because I interviewed him about 3 years ago as well. Fans can look that up on this channel. He ended up having a successful career too, as you mentioned. As far as the Stampede territory at the time you were breaking in, how was business at that time? Because I know it had its ups and downs over the years.
When I first got into it, I didn't know the economics of it. All I knew was where was my career going, what kind of money. I had no idea. I had this. I was disillusioned to some degree after the first year because I anticipated. Obviously, it was vanity, ego, whatever it was. I thought now that I'm in the world of pro wrestling, I'm going to become wealthy and become famous because everybody I saw on television previously to that, growing up on Vancouver Island and watching All Star Wrestling, I thought all those guys were all superstars and they were all making millions of dollars. So I thought, my God, my life is about to change dramatically. And then I got a bunch of checks. I'm traveling around the territory doing these wrestling shows night after night for the first year, and I'm averaging $90 a week. And I think the fans must have thought, gee, these guys are making a fortune, but I was not making a fortune. And I thought, okay, maybe this is my apprenticeship. I'm serving, but eventually, big money's going to come and, we'll become famous and all that. And unfortunately, that was not to be true. So I recognized something fairly quickly in the business. After my first year, I moved on to Vancouver, did all-star wrestling. Things got better. I started to make more money. I was higher up in the cards. But I also realized something else, that for me to really succeed in the business, to do well, if I was hoping to make better money and have a better position on the card in main events and that, I decided I had to think from a marketing perspective. I had to think of, if I came up with ideas that would put people in the audience, it would fill the buildings. Plus, I needed to work with guys who were marketing-minded guys who recognized that this was a business and that we needed to satisfy the audiences, give them what they wanted to see, give the fans a show they wanted to see. And what I came up with is the idea of like television series. Today, you look at Survivor as an example. You tune in each week because you want to see what happens to the contestants. And what I drew from was TV shows like Dallas and Dynasty, where they would do cliffhangers. They would cut the show off and make you want to come back next week to see what was going to happen. So I thought I need to bring that kind of thinking to wrestling. So I talked to the promoters, Stu Hart as an example, and then I would pick a villain, a guy who I felt would cooperate, like an Archie Goldie or a Tor Kamata. And I talked about how we should address the business in two ways. One, we need to fill the arenas, which would satisfy the promoters, make them money, which would increase more money for us. And then number two, I thought it was critical that why aren't we telling storylines that the fans would tune into, that they wanted to follow, they wanted to come back each week to the arena. So in developing matches like the ladder match was sequel. I used to say to the promoters, these are not just one-time only matches. What we'll do is we'll create a storyline which could go on for 3 or 4 weeks in a row, filling the arenas. Everybody makes more money and the fans are more satisfied because they've got something now to attach to a storyline. So I found that really gave me longevity. That helped me as I moved to territory, like Los Angeles and places like that. I was better received. I was higher in the cards and I made better money and I did better. But I don't think I would have went far in the business if I hadn't made that transition, because I wasn't the biggest guy in the business. I wasn't the best looking guy in the business. And there were so many of these guys that were athletic looking. They were great talkers on television. They brought a lot to the table. But I noticed also that very few guys were working angles or telling stories. So that was the opportunity that I felt that was going to help me create longevity.
One of the stories that you came up with, as one of our fans here, John Stewart, is asking about, is the ladder match, which you actually were the first person to do a ladder match. A lot of people think it was Bret Hart's, but
No.
he took the idea from you. Could you explain to us how you came up with that concept?
Sure. Yeah, that was in the early 70s. It was around that time I was talking about. I'd created other matches that were sort of storytelling matches, but I thought the ladder match, when I looked at it, I was working with a big Japanese fellow. His name was Tor Kamata, and he weighed about 300 pounds. And I had a meeting with him, and I discussed the potential of laying out the program, or the map, you will, for the ladder match. And I had suggested to him that it wasn't a one-time only thing, that what we would do is build this story, if you will, with the fans, where Tora Kamada, I worked in a tag team match with him, and every time I would tag in, he'd run out. I couldn't keep him in the ring. And I said, we need to do this 3 or 4 weeks in a row so the fans get frustrated with you not meeting me head on. I said, to follow up with that, what we'll do is I'll create this match. I'll make a proposition. I'll offer you $5,000 to stay in the ring and fight with me. But what I'll do is suspend that $5,000 above the ring and set a ladder up outside. The first guy who can set up the ladder and get the money wins the match. And then he, because of the greed aspect of the story, agreed to do the match because he thought he could get my $5,000. And of course, we did that match, and the building was sold out, and the people were lined up down the street. Then I suggested what we would do is come back in following weeks with everything from the North American belt hanging up there to another bag of money hanging up, more money. Then I offered the proposal of saying that if I won the ladder match, if he put up money, then I would throw the money to the crowd. And of course, I won the match. I threw on television, I would throw the bag of money out into the air, and it would flutter like leaves. And the people would see this, and they were excited because they could be a part of the victory of sharing the money. And we took that all over the place, and we sold out week after week after week. Well, of course, Stu Hart, he said to me at that point, he just said to me, any other ideas you got, you come out with, please share them with me. We want to pursue this kind of business where we're telling stories to our fans. So the ladder match was definitely something I developed. And then, of course, in later years, Bret Hart, I had suggested to Bret that the WWE would do well with the ladder match, and he agreed. And of course, he took it to Vince and suggested it to Vince. And I'm told, Bret would probably verify this, that Vince was quite resistant to it at first. I don't think he saw the value in it. And then eventually, I'm now told that the ladder match is probably one of the biggest money makers that the WWE has ever used as a gimmick match throughout the history of the WWE.
And one other match that you kind of are famous for that Billy Graham talks about in his book is you actually had, I believe, the first match of superstar Billy Graham.
Yeah.
About that experience, because he's very popular on this channel.
Well, it's funny. He and I hit it off immediately. I just saw the potential in him right away. One, he was a great speaker, which not everybody is so skilled at. And number two, he had that physical presence. But also there was another piece about him that I liked about him right away. His name was Wayne Coleman, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember right. He was receptive to business, to marketing. And I said to him, we could do some business. His size was so overbearing on most of the wrestlers. I thought, we need an idea. We need something to work with that would give me equality to him, that the fans could believe that I could beat him, because nobody looked like anybody could beat him. So one night he did an arm wrestling. I'm sure he'll remember this. He was taking on all comers for arm wrestling in the middle of the ring. So he'd gone through about 5 or 6 people already, just pounded their arms down immediately. He's a very powerful guy and very charismatic and very, very personable. So I waited back a ways. I waited till he arm wrestled about 5 or 6 people, and some fairly notable guys. He put them down right away. And then when I got up to arm wrestle him, I winked at him. And what we did is I held his arm up. He couldn't put me down as fast as everybody else. And I held him for about 30 seconds. The building popped. Everybody went crazy. It set the stage for him and I to move forward from that, because it looked like I was just maybe not as strong as him, but I was somebody who would be a fair opponent to him. And of course, we had some good matches, and he always apologized about being a raw rookie and potatoing people. And potatoing, by the way, is when you throw a punch and you really hit a guy, and hurt him somewhat. But he never hurt me. He was a little bit stiff, but he learned quickly. And I always projected him to be one of the big superstars, which he definitely became.
I was going to ask you that because there is that famous picture that I believe is in his book of, I think it's you that has him in a bear hug from behind, and he looks nothing like the man that would become superstar Billy Graham. It was before he had the blonde hair and everything. So I was wondering if you did expect him to become one of the WWE Hall of Famers, world champions. And
Yeah, he had natural ingredients. You know, it's kind of like a racehorse or like an athlete who all you need to do is refine their skills. They have natural skills, and he had them, and he could really speak well. You know, he was sort of like the Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you will, of his time. And you know, it was a fascinating time, Stampede Wrestling, and the period I was in it. I use an analogy of our time in Stampede Wrestling. I think of it specifically from about 69 to about 1975. And people have said to me, you know, it was the most watched show at that particular time, and it had a tremendous audience throughout Western Canada. And what I equate to is maybe The Godfather, the series, if you will. That was a movie that came out with a host of actors, and many of those actors went on to bigger careers, obviously, and many of them, like Al Pacino or James Caan, and many actors in that were very fortunate to be a part of that show, and who knew it would become a classic. And I've always felt my time in Stampede Wrestling was sort of like The Godfather. I had a role, a cast. I was part of a cast of characters that became famous, and many of them went on to be superstars. And I've always felt like my timing, you know, I never got rich in the world of pro wrestling by any means, but I had an experience that was quite unique and may never be again. Obviously, I mean, now that WWE rules the world, these little independents like Stampede Wrestling may never arise again.
no, not. I don't think so, unfortunately. But I understand WWE might not return to live events once the lockdown comes or once it ends, other than the TV taping. So that might open some opportunities for territories to open up again.
Yeah, it's hard to know the effects of COVID. I mean, there are so many businesses going by the wayside because of COVID. But I just read an article recently where a lot of entrepreneurial type of people are looking to open businesses at the tail end of this, because with the vaccines coming out, then I think there's a lot of optimism in the next 2 to 3 months. You know, I'm fairly confident. I'm hoping to get a shot myself here. I mean, at 75, and with a couple of underlying health conditions, I've had a concern about this COVID virus, but I think there's a lot of optimism on the horizon, and I hope everyone stays safe, and I hope we all get through this all right.
A wrestling fan on here named Chaz Boss wants to know if you found Stu favored his sons over other wrestlers when you were with Stampede.
I think it's fair to say he probably did. He never spoke of it. Like, I knew Stu very, very well on a very personal basis. Matter of fact, I may have got to know him as well as anybody in the business, if maybe not more. I drove the car for him a lot. I spent hours and hours at his house talking about ideas, promotions. I would say, I think Brett, if he was favored properly, because look what he became. I mean, Brett became truly a superstar. And I think Brett would have done that without his dad's help. I think if he would have pursued the business, and I think Brett had the capacity to be a superstar. Bruce had the opportunity of family association. There's no question about that. I mean, he was the booker, and plus he wrestled. Would he have made it in a lot of other territories? I can't answer that question, but I would suggest it may have been more difficult for him to have had a career outside of Stu's. I mean, size has a big bearing on the business. And, you know, some of the Hart boys like Smith Hart, who passed away, you know, rest in peace. You know, I certainly was sad to see him go. Of course, Ross, a true consummate gentleman. I think he was a great ambassador for the family. Ross was so similar to his mother. He just so diplomatic and so personable. Keith Hart was a good wrestler, not overly big, but he was good. I think he had the advantage of being a family member. I don't know if he wanted to pursue the business that much. He became a fireman and did very well, very likable, nice guy. Generally speaking, was there some favoritism? I would suggest there could have been, but then of course, if I was in the same situation, would I have favored my children? I'd probably be guilty of that. So, yeah, I would say the question is fair to say an answer at, yeah, there may have been some favoritism, sure.
Do you think that hurt him in later years when they restarted after WWE had made that deal with them to close down and they restarted back up in the late 80s? Do you think the booking issues hurt them by putting some people like Bruce in charge of booking at times, and then the son-in-law Dynamite Kid?
The funny thing is, I believe a lot about timing. If you're in the right place at the right time, you can be successful. Here's a question that I wonder if anyone has the direct answer to. Is that wrestling had an era, an opportunity. It fit. It's like a television program that runs its course. Did Stampede Wrestling run its course and then Vince McMahon came along? And then the appeal of the show, and Stampede Wrestling, when they tried to resurrect it, they didn't have television. Okay, they're doing little shows here and there. I always thought television was a major, major piece in doing it. The television made wrestlers famous. People saw you on television and they associated to you as a famous celebrity. Without television, I think it was a very rough hill to climb for Bruce or for anybody else to take over the show. So when Vince took over and Stampede Wrestling collapsed, if I would have been approached and they would ask me, do you think we should try to, bring the show back? I would have suggested not, because I don't think they had the financial capacity to do it. I don't think without television they could do it. And it just never did get traction again. So I'm of a belief that certain things they have a shelf life, if you will. And I think when WWE came along, that was sort of the end of the days for all the independent shows. And so I would have suggested not to run the show again. But again, it's easy to have 20/20. Hindsight's pretty clear,
And you brought up Smith Hart earlier, who unfortunately passed away. He was the oldest Hart family member.
Right.
Is it true that he never actually moved out of the Hart house?
He was an interesting guy. That's basically true. He lived in Puerto Rico for a while. He had a wife or two. I was never sure of how many wives and children he had, but Smith was a separate entity, if you will, within himself. I always got along with him well. My family liked him. We had him to our home numerous times. A very pleasant, diplomatic guy. He was a bit of a scoundrel in certain ways. I know Stu had a nickname for him. He survived. He was a unique individual. He survived without the 9-to-5 job approach of life. He was always looking for the angle. But I speak well of him because he never did me any harm, and he was always very courteous and very polite and just very generous also with his comments. He was always, I got along well with him, but I know he was a bit of a character, if you will.
Yeah, he was a character, but I liked him as well. He did come up here to Ontario towards the end of his life for a couple of periods, and he would attend some of our Great North Wrestling events here, and always was a funny character to have around. Carl Van Slyke, a fan watching right now, asked if you enjoyed teaming with Bobby Jaggers in Puerto Rico. I don't know exactly what your experience in Puerto Rico was, if any.
I didn't have any experience in Puerto Rico. Matter of fact, the interesting thing that's happened to me in my life is there was a fellow who took my name, and he took my name when I retired, and he went around wrestling all over under my name. And so a lot of people have asked me about matches in particular different parts of the world, and I say I've never been there. I've never been to Puerto Rico. So this fellow who took my name, he lives in Edmonton now. And I remember in the very beginning, I met him and I said to him, you've taken my name. I'm not sure. It's a bit of an honor, but as long as you never do anything illegal, charge bills anywhere or becomes, detrimental to me personally, I have no issue with that. But I've heard that same question. People have said to, gee, I see you were here or there. And I'll think, no, I never was there. So that's the other Dan Kroffat, I guess he's asking about.
So there you go. At least we have that on the record now. So hopefully someone will fix your official biography on Wikipedia. It says you were two-time Caribbean tag team champion.
No.
That's the other day. One guy I do know that you must have had some interaction with, as Ryan is asking you about here. He's wondering if you could tell us about Bad News Brown, who was known as Bad News Allen up in Stampede.
Yeah, I knew him. I must be honest with you. We didn't have chemistry, him and I. I always felt like he had a chip on his shoulder. I can't, I've always felt you try to take the high road with relationships. And I don't want to say anything, detrimental about other people because I don't think it's fair. I've made mistakes in my life. So I don't like criticizing other people. I accept my mistakes and quite often accept others as well. But Bad News Allen was a separate entity, if you will, in himself. I mean, he was a pretty tough guy. And I think that he sometimes, he was very impatient with certain wrestlers. And I never felt chemistry with him at all. So he and I never worked. We could have, but I proposed angles to guys I could work with, like the Honky Tonk Man or Tor Kamada or Archie Goldie the Stomper, and the list goes on of guys that I worked with. But they were all business minded, and there was more of a marketing mind. I'd always talked about how we could do business. And I just never felt a connection with Bad News Allen. He was a very powerful, imposing looking guy, but he also had an edge to his personality that I'd found. So I basically just never felt the connection.
There's another fan on here, Mar Harajar. He's asking if you ever encountered Chris Benoit and thoughts on if WWE should put him in the Hall of Fame despite the terrible.
Yeah, that was a sad story. It's funny you ask about Chris Benoit. I knew him at a very, very young age when he was in Stampede Wrestling, and I counseled him somewhat. Him and Owen Hart at one time. I knew Owen since he was 4 years old, and I knew Brett since he was about 12. And I remember Chris Benoit. I had him picked as another superstar. I said, he wasn't that big a guy, but he had an impressive look about him, and he had real good wrestling skills. And I remember talking to him and Owen about tag teams and how to work as a team together and how they could benefit about solidifying their tag teams, like really working, doing, things in the ring together in a partnership. I would have never in a million years had picked the outcome that eventually happened to him. And, whether the WWE puts him in, it's almost like Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid, two of the greatest workers. I mean, I knew them both personally, and I had the opportunity. My last match was in the Saddle Dome for the WWE, and we had long discussions over the years with both of them, but I'm not too sure if the WWE saw them from a personal point of view as candidates. And Chris Benoit, with what happened in his case, I don't know where that's going to end up. That's a tough call.
You mentioned wrestling for WWE in the Saddle Dome. As far as that deal that Stu made with WWE, do you think it was all WWE's fault that it fell through, or was it partly Stu's kids possibly not upholding their end of the bargain as far as the help they were supposed to give with promotion and so forth? Or was it really just Vince McMahon going back on his deal?
That's a great question, but unfortunately I can't give you the answer because I didn't know the details of the conversations. sometimes rumors can be dangerous because you don't get both sides of the story. And the other piece to rumors is sometimes a rumor is constructed to favor the individual or the people they're talking about. So as much as I heard about it as you may have heard, I didn't know the details. So I really can't comment on what would be the right answer.
There's a fan on here, John, that wants to know if you have any stories about Ed Whalen, who I'm sure you had a lot of interactions with.
You know what? Two stories. On a personal basis, great guy, a good friend. I did a lot of fundraising, charity work with him in my later years. Great guy. Like what you saw on television and who he was genuinely that guy. From a commentary's point of view, he was probably one of the best commentators I had ever worked with. He was fair, he was generous, he was personable. I think he was a major piece of the show. I used to say to Stu all the time, Ed Whalen is really an integral part of this program. Like he plays a very significant role. His interviews with a lot of the characters, whether it was John Foley or other individuals, Maka Singh or whoever it was, there was always that. I loved it. It was a bit of a clash of the personalities, but also there was an embracement between whoever Ed was interviewing. He would get into it with them, and he knew how to manage the relationships in his interviews. And I got to know him personally. As I say, we did a lot of fundraising together, charity work, as I've continued to doing right now into my later years. And I can't say enough about Ed Whalen. If people got to know him, if you were lucky enough to be his friend, then you're a lucky guy.
There's a fan on here named Lance asking if you ever wrestled the original Sheik. I know you wrestled Abdullah the Butcher.
No, I never worked with the Sheik. No, I worked with Abdullah the Butcher numerous times, yes, but not the Sheik.
How was Abdullah to work with? I know he was one of the top draws in the history of Stampede.
He was an interesting guy. Abdullah, it was hit or miss with him. It was black or white. And I say that in this way, is that some guys worked with him and it was terrible, and other guys worked with him and it was great. And I was so fortunate because it worked out well. For whatever reason, he liked me, and he would really give me a good match. And number two, which was significant about Abdullah, is he loved blood. He loved the blood. And there were cases where he would, as most of the fans know, the blood is brought on with a razor blade. And sometimes he would cut guys without their permission. And of course, it created a lot of problems for everybody. But he never cut me once. He never asked me to cut. And I worked some angles with him, and his matches were always pretty easy to predict. It was bang, bang, bang. He would pound you, and then you make a big comeback. He would fly, run around, drop kicks, run out of the ring, and before you knew it, there were 5-minute matches, and they were over. Abdullah's matches I never had an occasion where a match went more than 7 or 8 minutes with him. And I think that was generally because look how big he was. But I know there was a lot of controversy attached to working with him. There were a lot of guys that did not like working with him. And then there was others, as in my case, I was very fortunate. It worked well.
Billy Graham tells a story in his book. I don't know if you were at this event, but he said he once witnessed Abdullah tape a razor blade to a popsicle stick in Lethbridge on an Indian reserve for Stampede Wrestling. And
I know what he's talking about. He worked with an indigenous guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were you there for that?
Yeah, and he cut him, and he really cut him deep, and he cut him bad. I do recall that.
Yeah, he said the guy had to go to the hospital, and on his way out, someone slipped a $50 bill in his pants or something.
That could have happened, but it's funny you bring that match up. Billy's absolutely right about that. I recall that the indigenous boy, that he was not very big. He shouldn't have been in the ring. He didn't have a wrestling presence about him. But Abdullah he sliced him up, and that was unfortunate. I remember that. That was a long, long time ago. That was in the early 70s. And yeah, that was terrible. It's funny Billy remembers that because I do recall it as well.
He said he remembered that the guy was completely covered in blood, other than
Yeah.
his eyes peeking out. He said it still disturbs him to this day.
Yeah, it was the worst, maybe the worst cut job I had ever seen. It's funny that he would mention that. I would agree.
Herb Simmons, who's a promoter up in the St. Louis area, says, "What did you think of Dr. D, David Schultz? He thinks you were still with Stu at the time Dr. D was around."
Yeah, I remember him. He was he was larger than life sort of personality, his interviews, his work, and everything. If I remember right, he was a guy that went on to and slapped the face of a commentator, if I'm not mistaken, of ABC or 60 Minutes or something like that. I think that I recall him from that perspective. But yeah, he was a good worker, very energized. He was a larger than life figure for Stampede Wrestling, and again, timing, his timing of being a part of the show, he was good. I don't remember having any ill feelings or thoughts about him. He just was a regular guy, very personable.
There's a fan on here, Ryan, that wants to know if you ever dated any female wrestlers in your younger days.
No, no.
There wasn't as many back in those days either as it was now. I don't think either.
No, I could, quite frankly, I only remember one or two females. And if we had we had a lot of the midgets, Sky Lolo, Little Beaver, all those guys were part of the programs. But the ladies weren't really as nearly as significant in the role they play as they do with WWE. Not even close, you know.
What were your thoughts on Owen Hart?
You know, he was a great kid. I had a lot of conversations with him. I met him when he was 4 years old. His dad brought him in the dressing room. He was everything that people have described him as. He had a great sense of humor. He was personable. He was complimentary. He was truly a likable kid. What I was astonished at was his transformation, how he physically got bigger. Like, he really worked out hard and he grew like Brett did. Brett was a scrawly. I met Brett when he was 12, and I remember him as a teenager. He's just a skinny kid with a big head of hair, but very personable also. Owen was. I didn't see the potential in him until, as the years went on, I started to notice that he had a lot of ring skills, and he was always curious. Like he really complimented me. I was in the dressing room. He'd come and ask me questions about certain things and that. And it was a real compliment now that I look back on it. You know, I appreciated his kindness. He was a really nice guy. I've never heard a negative thing about him, and it would be wrong if anyone ever did speak negatively of him.
There's a fan on here, Terry, that wants to know if you have any memories of working with Archie the Stomper Goldie.
Oh, you know what? We need 4 hours on your program. Archie, you know, he was an interesting guy too, because he didn't get along with everybody. He was always accused of being temperamental. He was also accused of wanting things his way. He was accused of not easy to work with, that if he didn't like a finish, he wouldn't do it. I had the total opposite relationship with him. I brought some ideas to him. He was very accommodating. He was business minded. I used to point out to him that this match was not a one-time only match. We would build it over 3-4 weeks, and this is what we would do. And he was so receptive. And in the ring, he never hurt me once. You could look at a match, I think it's on YouTube. It's about a 4 or 5 minute match of him and I working together. He was solid, yet he was safe. Working with him was always a joy. I couldn't. Every time I had the opportunity to come up with an idea or something, I always was looking for him. If he wasn't in the territory, then I always wondered where he was.
Big Plan Dan is wondering if you enjoyed working with Stampede Wrestling star Tiger Tommaso.
Oh, Tiger! You know, he was a colorful character and a nice guy. You know, tweet Tiger Tommaso. You know, believe it or not, he was another guy. Him and Earl Black tagged up a lot, and they were both great guys to work with. I remember him and Gil Hayes were a tag team, and they were a great team together. It was always a night off with Tiger. He was so gentle. He was a likable guy. If you knew him personally, he was just a real personable guy. You know, the sad thing in this interview, talking to you, is a lot of the people we've mentioned are gone. And I guess that's part of getting old, is we lose a lot of the people that we worked with. And unfortunately, I've seen too many of them go. And, you know, now at 75, I know 90% of my life's over. And I think of many of the guys I worked with who have gone before me. And I can only tell you that so many of them were seen as characters on the screen. But if you knew them personally, I've often alluded to the fact that many of the villains were actually some of the nicest guys. And some of the baby faces, the supposedly good guys, some cases they weren't such nice guys. So I had the pleasure of meeting all of them on both sides, and I have some great memories. But Tiger Tommaso in particular, he was a real nice guy.
How was Dynamite Kid to you personally? Because we've heard that sometimes he could have bad dealings outside of the ring, but that was probably more with the younger wrestlers, I imagine.
You know, there's another experience. You talk about his reputation. He definitely had a reputation. He was short-tempered with a lot of people as the time went on. I had the privilege of one of his first matches with him when he came to Calgary. He weighed probably 170 pounds. Our match went 45 minutes. I probably lost 7 pounds in water fluid weight because this guy was in such great shape. He was an absolute pleasure to work with. I got to know him over the years. We had a lot of great discussions. He was open to suggestions and ideas. And then when him and Davey Boy tagged up, I remember one of my last match in 1985 was in the Saddle Dome, and it was a triple main event. It was Hulk Hogan against King Kong Bundy. It was the British Bulldogs against Beefcake and Johnny Valentine, and myself against the Honky Tonk Man. We sat in the dressing room, and I had one of the best conversations with Dynamite forever. After all these years of knowing each other, I'd never had a moment of problem with him. He was always the nicest guy to me, but yet I'd heard all these stories outside of that. So again, sometimes in life, the experience we have with an individual isn't always what happens with others as well.
Thomas Robinson on here is asking if you have any memories of Maurice Mad Dog Vachon.
No, only from I saw him at CAC, the Cauliflower Club but I never worked with him. I didn't know him personally. No.
Could you tell us about your Cauliflower Alley Club award that you received?
Oh, it's really unexpected. I mean, I got a call one day and they said to me, we'd like to present you with an award for your contribution to pro wrestling. So in 2011, they flew me in. And, you know, it was really an honor receiving the award. And I had an opportunity to speak to the people that I appreciated, you know, that were influential in my receiving the award. And the three people I spoke to was, one, the opponents that I had worked with in the business who put me over. Because quite often guys, you know, our vanity, our ego, we think it's all about us. But the truth of the matter, in the world of pro wrestling, you go nowhere unless your opponent is willing to allow you to have your hand raised. So I expressed my gratitude to them. Number two, I expressed my gratitude to the media, because quite frankly, like your program and other people, whether they're magazine people or they're writers or television or whatever, our careers go nowhere unless the world gets to know us. So the media really does a great job in preserving our histories and allowing us to show our wares. So I was very appreciative of that. And number three, I've always said this, and on your show, it gives me the opportunity to do this as well, is to express my gratitude to the fans who supported us, because quite frankly, we wouldn't have made a living. We would have gone nowhere without the fans. And when you think about this, the fans travel sometimes long distances through adverse weather to get to arenas. They buy those tickets. They come out and they support us. You can't take them for granted. You walk into an arena. I've often said to wrestlers in a dressing room, if this arena was empty tonight, would you be able to go out there and still put on a show with the same enthusiasm? Of course not. So when you walk into an arena, whether there's 500 people or 5,000 people, your show, that what you're doing is all about your relationship with them. So never once had I ever thought throughout my whole career that I was not appreciative of fan support. I used to get letters. I tried to answer them all. And I still to this day say that the fans are an integral, very important piece in what we do. And they provide us the ability to make a living and to show our wares.
As far as Andre the Giant, there's a few fans on here that have been asking what were your experiences like with him. I know they brought him in fairly regularly to Stampede when you were.
Yeah, I had him as a tag team partner, believe it or not. I also got to know him quite well. He and I traveled together in the car. I'll tell you a very quick story. He and I once did a show up in Edmonton, and Stu Hart, we drove up in Stu's car, and Andre and I sat in the back seat. And traditionally, at the end of the show in Edmonton, what would happen would be that Stu would then load us into the cars and stop off at Kentucky Fried Chicken and buy us some chicken to eat on the way home to Calgary, about a 2.5-hour drive. Well, on this particular night, Andre was in the back and Stu said, "Would you like some chicken?" And Andre, with his deep voice, said, "Yes, I would like my chicken." And he said, "How much would you like?" And he said, "Give me a bucket." A bucket of chicken had 21 pieces in it. And Andre the Giant, he had a 6-pack of beer right beside him there. And I wondered about that, drinking, but in those days, it wasn't such a big deal. And I watched Andre go through 21 pieces of chicken, throwing the bones out the window as we were going down the highway. He did that in about 45 minutes. And to this day, I'm still astonished to think that, he just woofed through that chicken like he hadn't eaten in a week. He was a very likable, personable guy, and unfortunately died way too young. But a real pleasure to be within the dressing room, and he was always a very likable person. I never heard anyone ever speak illy of him.
The one time I met you when I was living out in the Calgary area was with Les Thornton many years ago, where I was just a kid that he took to you to give some advice to. Could you share some memories of Les Thornton? And also, I remember when I met you that day, you told me a story that you were once brought into WCW to get some advice and had a dinner with Hulk Hogan. So maybe you could also share that story because it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was flown in. Actually, it was after Owen Hart's death. He died in '99. And I was flown in to WCW for a Monday Night Raw, and Bobby Heenan was the interviewer, and they brought me in to talk about angles. And Bret Hart had set that up for me, and we had a meeting. I discussed some angles with them and what have you. I suggested that some of the things they could do to make the show more popular, and had a great visit with Bobby Heenan, who was a terrific guy. May he rest in peace as well. And then we had a dinner at the end of that, and we went to a restaurant, and Hulk Hogan was there, and there was a big table. There was about 8 of us. Bret was there. I think Bret would recall this. And I remember sitting at the table, and Hulk Hogan, he was, he was an interesting guy, Hulk Hogan. I was around him numerous times, and not one of my favorite people. I just found him to be somewhat arrogant. And you could tell the vanity and the ego of him was certainly a big piece of his personality. I kind of wish I had got a chance to know him better, because I'd like to have been more, maybe have an opinion about him based on more of an experience. But I'll never recall, or I do recall the fact that he ordered a big steak, and we're all sitting at the table eating at this restaurant, which was closed off to the public. And at the end of the dinner, he just got up and walked out of the restaurant, and the waiter came over and with the bills for the table, and they said, "Mr. Hogan's bill is here," and he just got up and walked away and didn't even pay his bill. I don't know to this day if they pursued him and got him to pay the bill, but I thought that was rather arrogant on his part. And I just have to say, in all honesty, I never had a real good opinion about him. Even in the Saddle Dome, in my last show, he did something that I never really forgot and felt really bad about. Was that when we had the arena packed, there was 22,000 people in there, and it was in Calgary in the Saddle Dome, and it was during a time when there was a bunch of young showgirls there who were a part of the Stampede, which is a great big event here in Calgary. And they were waiting outside the dressing room, and they all asked if they could get Hulk Hogan's autograph, and they were waiting. He came out the door, and they were all standing there, these young girls, 16, 17-year-old with cowboy hats on, and they were, really sweet young girls. And he just snubbed them and walked right by them and wouldn't sign it. And, I was really disappointed by that. So I took their programs that they had, and I took them in the dressing room, and I asked all the guys to sign them, and there was the British Bulldogs, and everybody was there, and they all signed them, and I took them back out, and I give these programs that were all signed to these young girls, and I apologized about Hulk Hogan. But little things like that sometimes create lasting memories, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of great memories of my association with him.
And as far as Les Thornton, who unfortunately passed away, could you share any memories of him? I know that you two were pretty close.
Great guy. Les Thornton was a genuine wrestler. I was not a genuine wrestler. I had very little wrestling skills really outside of the showmanship side of it. He was a genuine wrestler. Like, he could really be what we called a shooter. He was genuinely skilled in real wrestling, and he kept himself very fit. He had a wonderful wife. Her name was Terry. I remember them first meeting in Calgary. They spent their whole lives together until he passed. Just a great guy. He traveled with me a lot, very personable, great sense of humor. Just a real good guy, and a good guy for the business. He was good with fans. He put on great performances every night. He did a great job. I have to, I could go on and on about our personal relationship. He loved fishing. I took him fishing a few times. Like, just, one of the real regular great guys. If anybody has any thoughts about him, I would like people to know he was a really good guy.
There's been a few fans on here asking if you ever met Danny Hodge, who unfortunately passed away Christmas Eve.
Just once down at CAC in Las Vegas, just once, but never really spent any time with him. His reputation was he was one of the great shooters of all times, and that he had a grip that could break a vice. I heard all the stories, but never worked with him. The only real shooter I ever get to know that was really a super tough guy, I knew two of them, actually. One of them was a great guy, and the other guy I had no respect for whatsoever, was George Gordienko. Was a guy to be admired, great tough guy, but also a nice guy in and out of the ring. And the other one I knew was Billy Robinson, who was a bully, who, when he first came from England here, he had a lot of matches with me in the beginning, and he was very difficult to work with. He was hard on you. He stretched you. I never cared for him much because of the bully piece in him. I heard he changed when he moved on years later to Minnesota and I'm happy to hear he changed. But those are two of the real genuine tough guys that I ever met. But Danny Hodge, I didn't know.
Wasn't there some story that Billy tried to rough up Archie Goldie once, and Archie just left the ring and left the territory for a while?
Yeah, that could be true, because Archie had no tolerance for that kind of stuff. Archie wasn't a shooter. Archie was just a great worker, and he was all about business. And I can't say enough about him. I'm just sad. I was deeply saddened when he passed on, and the circumstances that he was living in the later years of his life. He was financially down and out, and it just really saddened me to hear that story.
There's a fan on here. We have a lot of Texas wrestling fans asking if you ever met Fritz Von Erich, who I know was in Stampede for a while.
No, I worked with Jack Briscoe. I worked with some of the Texas guys. I worked in Louisiana, Arkansas. I worked with Dory Funk, but no, I didn't know him.
There's a fan on here as we wind it down asking, what was your thoughts on the whole Survivor Series thing with Bret Hart? I know you're close with Bret, and you're also in an upcoming A&E documentary with Bret.
What was your question? I'm sorry.
There was a fan on here asking your thoughts on Bret refusing to lose to Shawn Michaels in Montreal back in 1997, and also if you could tell us a little bit about your upcoming project with Brett.
Yeah, I can't speak to Montreal. I wasn't there. I got the information secondhand, and I'm always troubled with having an opinion on something that I don't have firsthand information on. I heard Brett's side of the story. I saw Vince McMahon. I saw, all the different things that were said, but I wasn't a part of it. So it's hard for me to express that. I will speak to Brett. He and I have been friends for years and years and years. I felt privileged when he took the ladder match that I had developed to WWE. We talked not as regular as we used to. It's not because it was a falling out. We just don't cross paths a lot, but I have spoke to him in the last month or two. And we are doing a program. It comes out in April for your audience. A&E does biography, and I was privileged to be asked to do a part on Stampede Wrestling, and there'll be a part on Brett and his career and his life. So I would suggest to your fans that they might want to tune in to catch that in April, A&E's biography. I look forward to seeing that myself. And I would suggest it should be very interesting. On a closing note, I'd like to maybe send a message out, if I may, to all the up-and-coming young wrestlers out there. Someone asked me a question not that long ago. They said, when you retired, how easy was it for you to retire and move on? I think that's one of the most relevant questions you can be asked, is when you finish one career, is be prepared for that transition. And I found great success. And when I say success, I mean more fulfillment and purpose in working with community and fundraising, charity work, volunteering. I can't begin to tell you how fulfilling that is, to be a part of a community where you can make a difference in people's lives. And you're not getting paid to do it, but the payment comes in an emotional form. You're feeling good about what you're doing and seeing the benefit it brings to other people. So I'm suggesting to a lot of wrestlers, young wrestlers, if you don't find a full career in wrestling, and even if you do, think of it as a porthole, because wrestling isn't a 30-year career. You have to plan your exit. And if it's not going well, or if even it's going well, give consideration to the day when your career will come to an end. What is it you want to do next? Prepare yourself for that move, because I think that's critical in avoiding a lot of things like depression, loneliness, financial issues. If you're prepared for that transition out of wrestling and into your next career, it's an important decision to be made.
And I hate to slip in one more question, but his name came up a bunch of times, and I know you must have had some interaction with him, is Harley Race. Yep. If you could share a quick thought about him.
A class act in and out of the ring. I had the privilege of wrestling him for the world title. I worked with Jack Briscoe. I worked with Gene Kiniski, Dory Funk. I had the privilege of working with a lot of world champions. But I will tell you, Harley Race was a night off. It was a pleasure working with him. He was generous in the ring. He gave you an opportunity to look good. Truly represented the belt well. I got to know him very well right up towards the end. I have nothing but high regards for him.
Thank you very much for your time today. I know even though you're retired, you keep very busy. And I don't know if you're even fully retired because you're doing volunteer work all the time. I saw on your Facebook you recently received an award from the library there in Cochrane, and you're doing all kinds of good things for the community. And it's a great community there. I used to live there and promoted some events in that town. So I'm glad to see that you've been a success story. So I'll let you close this off however you want to for your final message here.
Well, I just wish everyone well through these difficult times. COVID right now is dominating our lives, but I believe in optimism. We've survived the last 10 months of it. We're here, and I look forward to the spring as an absolute turnaround. I myself are looking forward to an inoculation, I hope within the next 6 weeks. I think we have to stay optimistic. We have to protect each other. I know the majority of people agree that wearing a mask and social distancing and staying home as much as we can will add to the opportunity to get through this. So in closing, I just want to thank the many fans that you have for supporting us, the world of pro wrestling, because without you, there would be no pro wrestling.